Hey guys, this is Jared Flynn with the BulkLoads podcast. Got Tyler with me?
What's going on, guys?
Oh man, why don't we start with a testimonial?
Yeah. This one we actually have from Nicholas Thielen. It's actually for Smart Freight, but he left us a testimonial. It says, hands down the best company to work with. I was very hesitant at first and then gave them a try. So glad I did, and I wouldn't change it for anything. Sarah and Jackie have been nothing but the best of the best. Thank you, Smart Freight.
That's awesome. I think if you don't know Smart Freight, that is a sister company of ours where we do next day pay. I know some people, we get the negative connotation, we're a factoring company, but we started Smart Freight because we really don't like other factoring companies. We don't like the way they were treating other people. I think it's even on our headline. We always say, man, we hate factoring companies, so we started our own. We just feel like they, not all of them, but a lot of them at that time were abusing drivers and not really providing a service. And you can see from Nick's comments that, I mean, we provide an exceptional service. We look at it more as a partnership and more as a payment processing center than we do a factoring company.
Yeah, I'll even go back and say, too, not too long ago, we posted on Smart Freight Facebook page, and you guys can kind of go look back at it. But, I mean, it was somebody else's story, but, man, it just got a lot of emotional reactions to it on that post. But basically, this guy was tied in with another factoring company that had a contract, and he was trying to get out of it. But they were basically his buyout. They were making him pay wasn't it $70,000 or something?
Yeah, it was ridiculous. Makes me sick to my stomach.
Yeah, that's what we absolutely hate to see, and that's one of the reasons we don't have contracts with Smart Freight.
Yeah. So again, check it out. We don't want to give you the sales pitch, but man, if you are looking for a better way to manage your funds, get your money next day, but more importantly, have just the safety and security that, hey, we have your back. We're taking care of all that off your plate. Like me, I am not good at the back end processing. That's not my wheelhouse.
I hate paperwork.
So I outsource that to other people, and that's why we started this. Those girls up there are phenomenal. They will take care of you. So if you get a chance, you can check out smartfreightfunding.com. There's also a quick pay link on BulkLoads on the apps to check it out. We'd love to speak with you. No contracts. If you don't like it anytime, you don't have to use it. So we'd appreciate that. But man, while we're talking about money, I just want to acknowledge, I think we do know that this is rough times for some companies. They're challenging times. I mean, I was speaking with a guy last week. Well, actually, I was talking to somebody that knows a driver that was telling him, like, he hauled a load back from the Northeast for 93 cents a mile.
Oh, my gosh.
Like, I haven't heard of that since, I think, 2005 when I was in the, when I first started the industry. Like, that's just insane. And that was specifically reefer freight that he was hauling out of there. But I'm like, man, we do know that the market has shifted. We know that tonnage is not out there. I've heard some reports that there's 4 trucks to every one load. So how do we manage through that? There was a comment I think made even on I think it was our last podcast or something along the lines of like, man, everyone wants to think things are rosy and good, but there's actually struggles. So I just want to acknowledge to our audience, we know that there are real struggles out there. And, one of our goals with the BulkLoads podcast is to bring uplifting, positive news, but tools that you all can use to be profitable. We say this all the time, Tyler, like we want people here for the long haul. We want customers. We want to serve you for as long as you're in business, and we want to try to figure out that. So we take that very serious on what content we can provide to our audience to give you the tools that you need to manage your business. We do know that it is tough out there, but we do think there are opportunities as well.
Right.
And that's kind of where we're going to talk about today. Man, like, will you be ready when the market shifts, and how do you prepare for that today? So today I'm going to bring on Ben Kowalski. Man, I think I got that wrong. But Ben, he actually runs his own podcast. It's called Freight 360. Tyler's going to put that in the show notes so you can go check them out. But they have a weekly podcast, maybe focused a little more on freight brokers. But I'll say this before you say, like, listen to it, because there's a different perspective of that. And I think depending on where you are on the freight supply chain, you can learn a lot from his podcast, kind of where they're at. And a lot of this, it's the same practical business advice, whether you're a shipping company, a brokerage, even just a driver out there. So we really encourage that. But we're going to break down, just some things that he sees in the market, but other ways to do that. And I'll save this to the end, but Ben is actually a freight coach as well, or he's a business coach specifically in freight. I am a big supporter of that. I have a business coach that I talk to on a monthly basis to help us. I'll say this, Tyler, we want to be where we are today, or I wouldn't even be where I am personally if I didn't have that person. So we take that very serious, like providing that information to you and getting that knowledge. And we'll talk more about that at the end of the show. So with that said, here's my conversation with Ben Kowalski. Ben, how are you?
Doing well. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, you're coming in from sunny Florida, I should say, right?
That I am. South Florida, down in Boca Raton.
Nice. We got connected through Freight Waves. I believe it was Kevin Hill. Yeah, introduced us.
Yeah,
and he said, "Man, you guys need to be talking. You guys are doing some similar stuff, and you guys would be a great resource." So yeah, thank you, Kevin, for recommending us. But Ben, you got quite the resume. I want to start with that, and I think we have some really good meaty content we're going to give to our users, but you've done a little bit of everything. Let's start there.
Yeah, looking forward to digging in. A little bit on my background. I mean, out of college, I'd say probably first 10 years of my career, I worked in banking and was in finance, and analyst, and then a lender. And then I got recruited actually when I moved to Florida by one of the larger brokerages in the country. I genuinely didn't even know our industry existed or had any idea how it functioned. But I remembered when they kind of recruited me going into the first interview and really just being exposed to it. I was like, this is outstanding. I'm like, I've done sales and I've done these things, but I'm just like, it has everything in it, right? From like the open market that functions to the sales side, to the small business aspect, to the competitive side of it, like all of it. I was just all in kind of from the beginning and just loved doing the job. So I worked with them for, say, a few years. I did really well. I was top, 5% in that organization out of like 5,000 or 6,000 other brokers. So did well there.
I want to stop right there real quick. Talk about that though. That's pretty impressive. I mean, in the 20 years I've been in this business, you see a lot of people come in and wash out. But you see there's something that stands out with just a few guys, man. They move fast. They rise to the top. Some of those people I knew that were go-getters and aggressive. I mean, now they have their own freight brokerage businesses, even assets and stuff like that. I mean, these guys, but like how did you set yourself apart from those guys, the others?
Yeah, I'd say two things. I worked in a sales company that was B2C previous to this for a few years. Actually, one of my best friends is a VP at that company. He's still there. And I really kind of learned sales there. So had a great coach there, first of all, that came in and helped coach us on sales techniques, the psychology behind it, and some of the, I don't know, the stuff that you don't think about on a day-to-day basis, but is helpful in understanding, how you approach conversations, tones of voice, and those things and techniques. And that was helpful. Absolutely. One of the also, I think, things that was vital was my manager there, and who's the VP, whatever now, really just taught us how you could set a goal, work backwards to your daily activity. And if you hit that, you were almost guaranteed to get to where you wanted to go. And, through being there for a couple years, I literally saw it with my best friend, right? We were, in his early 20s, he started working there probably making 50, 60 grand. By the time he was in his late 20s, he's well over six figures, close to probably like 200 grand. And it's just like somebody you've known your whole life seeing that kind of success. And when they're like literally just telling you like, it's not easy, but it is simple. Like if you set out where you want to be and you put the activity in and you stay consistent with it and you do the things that we're learning, that, some of the techniques and tones of voice and some of these, I would say, subjective things, like you almost always get there. And I would say that has held true in the 20 years I've been in sales for the most part. I have only seen one person put that activity in consistently every day and not make it in freight brokerage. And the irony is that person went on into a different industry and killed it. Like another type of sales. He ended up working for like a software company.
Yeah.
The transportation thing just wasn't a fit. But I mean, it really goes to show that if you are doing this day in and day out and staying consistent, like you will ultimately see success if you do it long enough. And I think those were two of the really fundamentally important things that I kind of brought to the table when I got the job. And I think the third was like a contrarian point of view, right? I tend to look for the things that are the opposite of what people are looking at, right? Like just my personality, I enjoy debating. I enjoy looking at the other side of things, not because I like arguing, but because that's what I don't see, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a great quote by Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's partner. And he says, you should never go into a negotiation or a debate unless you believe you understand the other sides better than you understand your own.
Ooh,
and to me,
that's good.
like, I feel like that contrarian point of view is like, look, if everybody's running this direction, there's probably an opportunity going the other direction. And to your question, I know it's kind of a long answer.
No, I love this.
How I was able to differentiate myself from that many people? All of the training in that company and everything, and they're a very big produce broker. They made their name as produce brokers. So all the training, all of the high earning brokers there were all chasing kind of the same things. And everybody's like, well, you should go with this too. But what I really learned very quickly is when you work in a very big company, you have two hurdles. One is you've got to get customers to obviously want to do business with you. That's the big hurdle. But prior to even getting the opportunity to pick up the phone to call that prospect, you need to get that lead in your name. And when there are 5,000 or 6,000 other people that have leads in their name, it is a difficult task to even get the prospects to be in your name to even be able to try to win them, right? So one of the things that became very apparent to me was like, if I try to fight and run in the same direction as everybody else, there's just way less opportunities because there's just more people, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, if I can find a way to go in a direction or find something that I think is valuable that no one else is seeing, there's just less people to compete with. And that's held true throughout my career, is that I try to look at things from a different point of view because that usually results in seeing an opportunity that most people don't see.
That's awesome. Well, keep talking about the story because I know like that led to, I mean, you've done intermodal stuff and some other things along the way. So,
and that's a really good one. One of the first markets I went after was brokerage, and I went at co-brokerage. Back then, it wasn't as dirty of a word or as bad of, and it hadn't been as fraudulent as as we know today.
Yep.
Back in the day, if you did things above board and everybody was on board with it, you had co-brokerage agreements, like you could do business that way. In fact, most of the large brokerages co-broker loads amongst each other because to service some of the larger customers, you need more capacity than usually one company can provide.
Yeah.
So anyway, long story short, that's kind of my first customers were in the co-brokerage realm. And again, not many people did it. That's why I kind of went in that area. Well, very shortly after, that was the next big opportunity was intermodal. Back then, I mean, very, very few brokers did drayage because your average margins were like in the tens of dollars, where most freight, you're at least looking at a couple $100 for your average margin. So it was always like, how in the world are you ever going to make money doing this, especially in a business model that was cradle to the grave where I worked? Like you have to be responsible for everything. There isn't somebody to lay off other work to. Your team or just you has to be able to do all of it, right? So at that time, what I was looking at was most of the major steamship lines were reorganizing themselves, either doing mergers, buying each other out. And again, one of the other things that I had learned earlier in my career is that I don't really care if a market is expanding or shrinking. I really just care that it is moving, because if it is moving, then that creates opportunities. That means the customers, the shippers, are evaluating. They're evaluating new transportation partners if a market is expanding, and they are also doing the same thing when it is shrinking. They are looking at who to cut and looking at who is adding value in unique ways. And if you can do that, you can stand out in those markets, right? There's that other famous saying by actually Warren Buffett, which is usually when the tide goes out, you see who's swimming naked, right? And they say when interest rates go up, the tide is going out and it exposes all of the weaknesses in everybody's business model as well as their individual relationships, right?
Yeah.
To me, that's not a problem. That's a huge opportunity, right? That means that everybody is looking closely at who they're working with, which means there's a much higher standard that you've got to operate at. Well, to me, if you pay attention to detail, that's not that high of a standard if you're willing to put that effort in, right? So to me, it's very doable. So back to the intermodal, as that's happening, I'm like, clearly they're going to be reevaluating to some degree if they're looking at merging with other companies, their capacity, who has what. So that was when I started reaching out to a lot of them and to just see if we could start working with them. Well, the long story of it was back then, none of the steamship lines would work with non-asset companies because it's in their procurement documents. Like they literally won't onboard you. And still to this day, the UIIA oversees all of the intermodal stuff. So you can't even become a member of the UIIA if you don't have an asset. And that's their requirement. You've got to be a member of the UIA to be a carrier. So like, how do you overcome that?
Yeah.
Well, again, kind of taking the same playbook out was what ways can we look at this that is different than the ways everyone else is looking at the situation? Because in our conversations with them, they wanted to work with us. We were a large enough brokerage that they were like, look, they were the number one shipper. I'm like, you guys are the number one shipper. We are arguably the first or second largest brokerage. Like, there's really no reason why we shouldn't be able to work with each other. We still had these hurdles to overcome, but there was a need there and they felt comfortable talking to us to start it, right? But I think this goes to anybody out there when you're building relationships. It's not about just trying to get them to say yes. It's about making sure that both of you are aligned in what you're trying to achieve, right? Because if you can get that, now it's just a matter of time before you can get everybody's approval, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in that sense, those were the still hurdles that we had to overcome. How are you going to do this? If you're not a member of the UIA, how are you going to keep the same standards for hiring a carrier that we have, right?
Yeah.
And that was exactly what we worked on and built out and described to them was, look, as a broker, our job is not to be predictable and cheap. That's an assets job. Like they work by wanting to know as much as they can about where their freight is coming from so they can position their assets and pay for their fixed costs. Brokerages, we're flexibility, right? That's what we provide to the market. Shorter time window, we get you what you need when you need it because we don't have to reposition a driver in a truck. We can access that market at that given time for a fair rate to get you what you're trying to get. It's really just that simple. Now, once they really kind of, I don't want to say bought into that, but once we were on the same page, then it was just honestly proving to them that we had the systems to execute what they did in a longer time frame much quicker, right? And we do that anyway, but it was a matter of getting them and then legal and procurement and everybody to sign off on it. And again, it took probably 14 months to get the deal done. But ironically, once it got done, it was a huge opportunity because we closed that deal like 3 months before the ELD went into effect in like 17.
Yeah.
And then capacity just tightened up. Nobody could find a truck. And the demand for brokerage services like went through the roof. And it played out very well. We were able to get them what they needed in a very short amount of time that helped them service their customers. We made a fair rate for doing it, and it worked out for everybody.
One question specifically on that one. Why didn't an asset-based company figure that out before you all did?
There were a couple that did. Like I was aware of like 2 or 3 that were asset companies that had dual MCs that would broker to other drivers that they knew. So it was occurring, but it wasn't occurring at the scale at which like we were offering it. Like they were mostly regional. Like they would have a guy, maybe by the port, the Charleston port. I remember one in Norfolk. But where they had issues were at the terminals around the country during the ELDs and every port. And we were able to service that at a just much larger scale.
Okay. Wow. That's cool. All right. Let's keep moving forward. So you do the brokerage, then what's next? What's the next opportunity, challenge?
So, yeah. And honestly, one of the reasons why I kind of left that, loved working there, was doing well. They wanted me to move up to Cincinnati, and I like living in South Florida, and I already lived in the Northeast, so it was time for us to part ways. I then left the industry, took a 1-year sabbatical. I mean, it's pretty well known. Most of these companies have a year non-compete.
Yep.
So left, waited out my non-compete, went and got certified with a company called Southwestern Consulting. They've been in business for literally over 100 years. Went through their training, became a certified leadership coach, worked with them for more than a year, waited out my non-compete. And again, like I said earlier, like my passion is this industry for a lot of reasons. One of which is like, it's one of the last, I think, honestly, if not the only industry where a small company compete with the biggest companies because you don't get economies of scale. You don't get cheaper because you have more of anything. A truck still costs what a truck costs, and a driver still costs what a driver costs. So that's what I've always loved about it. So it gave me a great opportunity after that year to take what I'd learned coaching lots of salespeople and CEOs and managers, and then apply it really more specifically to transportation. So That's when Freight 360 was kind of born with my colleague, Nate Cross. He had done the podcast. He's got, close to 15 years experience in the industry, was doing a podcast called Midnight Freight Broker at the time. He left his organization and his co-host kind of split. And then, we had known each other because he was a recruiter for the agents. He would try to recruit me when I was at the big brokerage, and we kept touch. And I was like, hey, it's a great opportunity for us to do something, I think, together.
Yeah.
And that's where it kind of all came together. Like now I'm a certified coach. I'm doing that full time. We brought on the podcast. And then as that grew, we just did more of it. So we did have a relationship with one of the larger load board companies in the country. They approached us to do a course for a lot of their customers. So we developed that course. It's done really well. And then the TIA actually asked us to do the same. So Nate and I are accredited instructors, and we both teach the new broker success program for the Transportation Intermediaries Association. And that's kind of Freight 360. So a lot of that do one-on-one coaching. We did group coaching, and we trained for freight brokers. But alongside that, the other thing that I noticed was the longer I had been away from brokering freight, the less I was in touch with, honestly, like kind of the pulse of the industry, but also just like the problems you face and what you experience, right? And the longer that time goes, the less they're at your kind of fingertips, even mentally. So you just kind of lose track of those things.
Yeah.
So one of my clients actually kind of convinced me to get back into brokerage. He was like, hey, why don't you come on as an agent, broker some freight? So I got back into brokerage again. So I was then doing kind of both. And I still do that to this day, where I literally broker freight, still run that through kind of an agency model, and do the coaching, the training, and all of the content that we do for Freight 360.
That's awesome. As I've told you a little bit about my background, but as we've grown and expanded business units, I've faced the exact same thing. Like, hey, as I'm kind of building out, our insurance arm, our factoring arm, load board, our TMS system, like I'm doing this stuff high level, but I'm like, sometimes I'm missing the pulse of the industry. So how do I get in there? And there's been many times, like I still get a lot of these emails that go through our support and all that. And one time our IT guy said, well, I can turn all those off. Like that's flooding your mind. I was like, no, when I have time, I'm going through these. Like what better pulse than we see what the support requests are of your clients.
And it's funny you said that. Like that is probably the thing that we try to encourage our audience to do more than anything is send us questions, send us your issues. And again, it's not just myself. So we do respond to them. But to me, to your point, they are extremely valuable. And it's one of the things that I really love about the coaching side is, almost every week I will be in a coaching call for an hour. And as soon as I get out of that call, I'm like, 5 minutes of that is a great YouTube video. And I'll literally just make a note. And then the next day I will reiterate it. And that's the thing. It's like, I don't see every problem in my own book of business, but my clients, to your point, are experiencing them. That's where we get the ideas for the content to answer those questions, to put them back out to the audience. Because just like you said, you get caught up in the other things you're doing and kind of just lose track of some of the things that you experience on a day-to-day basis.
Some people we still have an active forum on our load board. And we get 50 to 60 post replies, and it gets pretty rough sometimes. And I can't think of the specific person. I was saying that we have this forum and he's in the industry. He's like, oh dude, that's tough. Or like, he actually used the word, hey, you got a set of this. If you got a form, like you allow these, but I'm like, you know what, as rough as that gets, and sometimes it gets pretty intense. We got to kind of break a fight up. Like we're learning so much about our customer we never knew,
And that is enormous. A lot of what I do in my free time is read and listen to about startups and business cases. To me, it's like real life sports, right? Except I'm betting with my life and all of my income. So to me, that's the way, and that's why it interests me. But the thing you just said is probably the lesson that I've heard repeated by more successful business owners than anything I've ever heard, which is if you don't have a feedback loop from your customers, you are not going to succeed long-term. You need to know what is happening in the business that you're owning all of the time if you expect to respond and create a good either product or service or however you want to define whatever it is you're selling. If you don't know what your customers are experiencing and frustrated with, it is inevitable that your business will cease to exist at some point, right?
Yeah, that's good. we're going to get on. We're going to talk a little bit about the coaching, because I think that's something a lot of our users know. That I had actually my life coach, business coach, on the podcast last summer, and man, it was just amazing. I had so many people reach out to me afterwards and be like, "How do I get started with that?" We're going to dive into that, but I want to back up a little bit, dude. You talked about repetition, like doing the same thing over and over and over, and like. I look at I have a 10-year-old son, 8-year-old boy. My 10-year-old, my 11-year-old plays basketball. 8-year-old's playing soccer. But dude, we're doing practice. It's the same drills over and over and over and over and over. And again, sometimes you don't see, but then there's finally that game, 3 or 4 games later, it's like, wow, we're getting better. Man, he's making those blocks. He's making those shots or whatever. Ben, talk about that in the business spec, because you talked about, hey, it's putting these processes together. Because here's the other thing I'm kind of dancing here, but sometimes you just got to keep doing the same thing, and then it eventually pays off. But I think sometimes so many guys I know, man, they pull out too early. Waters get choppy, and and maybe they didn't have the right structure, running their business, whether it was a brokerage carrier operation, and then they're gone. And I look back, it's like, man, dude, if you just weathered that storm another couple of years, you'd be this much ahead when the next opportunity comes or when the market reverses. Talk about that a little bit.
There's 3 things in there too that I think I want to unpack. The first is, and I use basketball as an analogy for prospecting often. And the thing that I usually talk about is most people, when they go to prospect, will mix everything together, meaning they will sit there, they'll scour the internet to find a company, then they'll read about the company, and then 12 minutes later, they'll pick up the phone, no answer, start the whole thing over again. If you prospect like that, not only is it hard to improve on any one of those specific activities, but it's also hard to even evaluate your effectiveness. And what I mean by that is, if you want to learn how to be a free throw shooter, right? Think Shaq 20 years ago, right? Terrible free throw shooter. And that's what, just in my head, that's the image that I always have is, if you wanted to get better at free throwing, you wouldn't shoot a free throw, chase your ball down, dribble around, and then shoot another one. You would have somebody stand under the rim, feed you a basketball. They would tell you, don't move your feet and just keep shooting until you get the feel, and just keep doing it over and over again until you get literally the muscle memory, where you have that literally happening in your brain to where it becomes kind of second nature. So in prospecting, where that happens is these things should be separate. Finding leads is its own skill set. And just doing that over and over again, you will get better at it. The second thing is making phone calls are their own skill set. And doing those things over and over again, you will get better at them. What becomes very difficult is when you mix them together, you run into the thing where when you want to make a phone call, everybody, I myself included, that I've ever met has some resistance to making a cold call. You have spent your entire life understanding social norms. It is not taught to you that it's okay to just walk into somebody's office without knocking on the door, or just interrupt somebody. That's what you've got to do. You know that they aren't expecting your call. There is resistance internally to that. Emotionally, it's hard. There's the 300-pound phone analogy. The first call is always the hardest to make. That, we know that. So what happens is when you mix those together, you are really hesitant to pick up the phone. So guess what you spend a little more time on every time you're doing it? Researching. And then at the end of the day, you make 6 calls and you get really frustrated, right? And you don't really get anywhere.
Yeah.
I always say, the mother of learning is repetition and everything that we do, right? And when you're trying to do lots of things, your brain isn't really improving on any one. It's looking at the whole process, right? The second thing, and I love this analogy that I kind of use for that, is I use literal prospecting when I'm teaching somebody new this. I'm picture a guy in 1850s California with a pickaxe on his shoulder going to mine gold, right? Picture a cartoon of a guy going out there.
I got it in my mind right now.
What most people do is they'll make a lot of attempts the first time they do this. They'll make 400 calls to 400 different companies, and everybody says no on the first call. They get demoralized and want to quit. I'm like, that would be like going out into a mountain that has gold in it somewhere, but you only ever dig 8 inches and then dig another hole, then dig another hole, then dig another hole. And by the end of the day, you've dug a very deep hole, but all of them are only this deep. But guess where the gold probably is? Maybe a little deeper than you've dug, and you just literally scratch the surface, right? There was a picture I remember that somebody had in sales a long time ago. It was like a cartoon of a miner and has him digging this big hole, and he's turned around and like 3 feet past where he stops digging is like all of the treasure, right? And that's what I picture when you said exactly what you did. And that's what happens. Most people have unrealistic expectations where they're going to make one phone call, get a yes, and then they're off to the races. When that doesn't happen, they get really frustrated and then they want to quit. So again, if you understand that you know it's going to take work to get there, one, it's not as demoralizing and it's not as difficult because you're expecting it, right? And two, if you stay consistent at it, to the third point you made is our market is a circle. It's always a circle, right? It's tight. On average, it takes 14 to 18 months historically for the market to go from tight to loose. The same thing again. Sometimes it's a little quicker, sometimes it's a little slower. So if it's tight now, it will inevitably be loose. And if it's loose and you don't find a need for yourself right now as a broker or a carrier, it will eventually be tight and they will need you again because it's a fluid market, right? But this ties into the first thing about consistent prospecting. Most people expect to turn a customer in a couple phone calls in 30 or a couple weeks. But guess what? If you just extend the timeline and just keep working that prospect to dig a deeper hole, to the other analogy, to build a stronger relationship, and you keep doing it, inevitably the market will turn in your favor. You don't even have to do anything different. You're not responsible for the market, but it will inevitably reach a place where that person is going to need your help, whether you're a carrier or a broker. And guess what? Who do you think the most likely person they are to give a shot to when they need it? The person they've been talking to for 11 or 14 months, or somebody that called them today and said, you want to work with me? And the irony is our industry, I think on the asset side as well as the brokerage side of everybody we work with, tends to have a very right now focus. The prospecting calls are, what freight do you have? What can we work with? If you're a broker, it's my boss needs more loads. I got to put revenue up. What can you give me today? But nobody ever from the shipper or the customer side wants to do business with somebody that they don't know that is calling them to solve a problem that they have, not the shipper, right? So they're going into the call me focused. I, me, mine. This is what I need.
You're making your problem my problem.
Yes. Now you interrupted them in the middle of their day with your problem.
Yeah.
You wonder why they don't want to talk to you and they want to get off the phone and not have a conversation. Again, it all kind of plays out that way. But I think to another point, like there are other ways that it can be done.
Ben, what would you say to carriers right now? And again, and you consult for another load board, and it's DAT. I'll say that plain. I told you earlier on, we do just more bulk stuff, and I think they do a little bit. We're kind of, that's our focus. So I would always say we're kind of friendly competitors. Spoke with those guys when we were at Matt's, but what would you say to a carrier, specifically even on a load board? Maybe the rates don't look desirable, I mean, market's soft. Yep. These rates are lower. They're calling on a shipper, calling on a broker, seeing, the rate's just not there that it should be for to operate their business. Frustrated. How would you respond to them to give them hope or to stay in the game?
Yes, I would. The first way I would respond
without bailing.
Is with empathy, because I do feel for them because they have fixed costs in ways that brokerages don't. They have wages that are different. Like there's a different model to an asset company than a brokerage. So I absolutely do sympathize with the situation, right? Now, the things that I think are actionable that can be done to get themselves out of these situations or to just, and again, these aren't things that are going to change things overnight or by tomorrow. But again, if you've got a long enough time frame, these are the things that I think help build these healthy companies are establishing more relationships directly with shippers, right? And again, where I think people get frustrated, and we have clients that are asset companies, the same as brokerage, is it's a lot of the same thing. Well, we're calling them and they don't have loads for us right now. So immediately they're frustrated and then don't want to do any more of it. And that's understandable. But again, if you try to, pick your eyes up, and I always kind of say, like, you're kind of looking at your feet. You're staring right now. Look up into the horizon. Look out over the next couple of weeks or months. And I'll usually ask them this question. Do you intend to be in this industry a year from now? Yes. How long have you been in it? A few years, and I have no intention of leaving. Okay, then. If we solve it a couple of weeks from now, does it still solve the problem? Yes. Okay. Well, if you solved it 2 months from now, could you sustain until you get to that point? Okay, well, that's a realistic time frame to start bringing on customers, right? Not today, not tomorrow, but over a couple of weeks and definitely over a couple of months, right? Then I would say start looking down at the lanes you're running, right? Like look at your current, not necessarily routing guide, but where you're running, where your customers are that you still want to service, and then start picking the places where you could go from there. Maybe not aren't already, but look at other opportunities, because I think a lot of times, and rightfully so, carriers are looking at the lanes and the places they've been delivering to want to pick up, and they look at the same place and go, the rates still aren't changing. I've called. What else do I have to do? Shake it up a little bit, right? Maybe look in a completely different direction. Maybe it's not ideal. Maybe you haven't historically wanted to go there for whatever reason, but start looking at heat maps, whether you're looking at any service, right? Start looking where the rates are in other areas where maybe you aren't going that often, right? And then start making some of these phone calls, start making inroads, right? Make the prospecting calls to establish some of these relationships that you can start having conversations over the next weeks and months. And the thing I would say as a tip when you make that call, don't call asking about what you need and when you need it. And I know we kind of joke about it, but I mean this sincerely, is it's hard to do that because that's the immediate problem.
Yeah.
You are suffering. You want that to go away. It's a natural inclination to go at that when that person picks up the phone, right? And I would say, remind yourself, whether it's a note on a piece of paper, get your mindset kind of in a second where you're just like, okay, I'm going to put the pain that I'm in financially to the side. I'm going to make this call and make it about them. Call them and ask those questions. Hey, and I almost always say this, even in my prospecting calls, is, look, I'm not looking to do business with you guys right now. I'm fully aware that I wouldn't expect you guys to have a need for us to work with you right now at all.
That's good.
Not why I'm calling. What I am calling is, I wanted to see because I think it might be a fit for us to maybe work together later down the line. Maybe it's a year from now, maybe it's a couple of weeks. I don't even know if it would be a fit, but that's kind of why I was reaching out. Usually that helps their guard come down.
Yeah.
Because why is their guard up in the first place? Because they think you're coming in to try to ask them for what they have on their desk and they're frustrated. Yes. Nobody wants to be cold called, right? So again, if you can assure them of why you're calling is that you want to see if there's a potential for a long-term relationship. And again, you've got a big advantage. You've got your own assets, right? That's what shippers want to work with.
Yeah.
And I can tell you unequivocally, every brokerage that we coach, including the ones that I work for and make phone calls on behalf of, every shipper is saying they want to work directly with owner ops. So there is an advantage, but again, you've got a lot of competition. It's pretty easy to differentiate yourself if you're having these conversations, because I can promise you most people aren't doing these things. And if they are, they're not doing it consistently enough for it to net a result, right? You should be doing this. And again, I don't want to throw numbers out there because everyone's in a different situation, but whatever that number is that you think you could make prospecting calls in a day, say good round numbers, you should be able to call between probably 5 and 10 per hour on average. And if you can spare an hour or two a day, 4 out of 5 days a week, right? That's 10 to 20 calls a day. Like that's almost 50 to 80 a week. You do that over a few months, you will have opportunities starting to arise.
Yeah, I'm thinking like even a lot of owner operators that we deal with, again, they're in the truck 10, 11 hours a day. And again, you got to do everything safety and compliant. But like, hey, if you can tee up, hey, I'm going to call these 10 prospects today while I'm driving down the road. My goal is not to sell them. I'm just going to make an introduction. Hey, my, when you talk to them, my goal today is not to tell you I need your freight. I'm just wanting to talk to you about my services. But like,
and I'll give you an even.
But like you said, we get back to the repetition. Like, do that every day.
Yes.
5 days a week you're driving, an hour a day you're in that cab. I mean, like I said, I'm not calling anybody out, but like instead of listening to XM radio or whatever, just, hey, I'm going to proactively make these calls every day. I'm going to have a reminder on my phone. It pops up. I know that I got to make 10 calls and 10 connections every day.
Exactly. And that's the whole thing. And these are cliche, but right, like there's the quote, and I'm gonna like pull it up because I like that one. But like Babe Ruth, the year he broke the home run record, right? Like had more strikeouts than anybody else, right?
Nobody talks about that.
And then there's where's this one? It's like, there's a Jordan quote where he's like, I've missed 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to make the game-winning shot and missed. I failed over and over again in my life, but that's why I succeed, right? To me, that encompasses what you were referring to earlier about even just your kids, right? Like when you practice and you make attempts, you will improve. Your tone of voice, your ability to just connect with somebody very quickly, all of that starts to happen. You start to get an ear for when somebody is receptive to versus when they're, frustrated, when to pull back, when to lean in. You can't learn that reading a book. You can't learn that from a YouTube video.
Yeah.
You can understand it. You learn it by doing it, right? Like you could watch an hour-long YouTube video. You would never learn how to ride a bike doing that. You've got to literally get on the bike and fall off and scrape your knees to actually learn how to ride a bike. It's the same thing with this. Like you can't get better at sales unless you make sales calls, right? And you've got to do that over and over again.
I love it. I want to turn to, and we're running we got about 5 more minutes. Ben, I want to talk about freight coaching and what you guys do, because I know that, and I'm not trying to sell your services by any means, but when I had my podcast with my coach, I had a lot of people reach out to me and say, man, I think, how does this work? Or what, what's the cost and all that? But talk about that, because, and I told you before we started the podcast here, how beneficial it was for me, and how more than anything, like, as entrepreneurs, as business owners, owner-operators, own your own brokerage, like you're really accountable to yourself. Yeah. Yes. You're accountable to yourself. And if you say you're going to do something, like, if you're telling yourself that, then you're accountable. But when you have somebody you tell it to, like a business coach or life coach, like, oh man, they're going to make you accountable. But I'm kind of planting the seed. Absolutely. But like one thing, and I can go, there's been so many things, but like, I just never thought how beneficial it would be to have a coach, and it is just it's paid dividends. It's 100%. It's just like, I didn't think some of the stuff would ever be possible, and may not have been if I didn't take that extra step to say, hey, I'm going to talk to somebody. I'm going to share my thoughts. I'm going to bounce stuff back. I'm going to let you take it from there.
I think absolutely. The accountability is huge. And one of the things I usually say is that, like, even if you have a manager, right, there's just certain things because of that relationship you're not going to be able to share, because guess what? They're in charge of whether you have a job or not. Now, when you have an outside person, there's that. And there's absolutely the accountability aspect of it, because we're all human. And guess what? We all aren't designed to just do the harder thing that we've committed to every single day. We have good days and bad days, right?
Oh, yeah.
So absolutely, I think the accountability in coaching is huge. It's probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest aspect of working with a coach. The other thing I would say is that, like, what really sold me too on just coaching kind of almost at every level, there's a book called The $1 Trillion Coach. And it's basically the gentleman who coached all of the CEOs of the large tech companies in the early 2000s. It's a great book, but you just really start to understand that, like, the CEO of Google and Apple and Microsoft, guess what they also all had? They all had coaches, right? These were arguably some of the most successful people in the history of business, and they all worked with a coach, and almost all for the same reason, is because when you are in, no matter what situation you're in, because I don't just want to say problems, because sometimes things are working. You are so focused on what you're doing that you don't see the rest of the context around you intentionally. Our brain works that way. Like, you can't see everything, because then you can't focus on doing what you're doing. So there are opportunities that everybody will miss because they're focused on what they're doing. And what a coach really does, I think, effectively, if you've got an effective coach, is they help you see the opportunities that are sometimes right in front of you.
Yeah.
They help you see the things that honestly are the things that, when we get in our own way, myself included, we all have that in our lives, right? They help you be aware of those things. They help you be aware of the things that you could be improving, and help you see some of the opportunities that are sometimes right in front of our face, and we're just staring right here, and they're right here, and they help bring that out. Not to mention, I think, and again, it sounds kind of cheesy, but having somebody in your corner that, once you know them, genuinely believes that you are going to succeed in what you are setting out to do. We all have that self-doubt to some degree when we set out, especially for a bigger goal, right? Hey, as if it's a bigger goal, it's never been done, at least by you. And there are going to be times where, guess what? If it's a big goal, it's going to get hard. In fact, probably more days than it's going to be easy or fun. That's when you have that person that helps not just encourage you, but believes in you.
Yeah.
And when that person believes in you, it's hard to not believe in yourself when the person you're talking to is there reassuring you that it is achievable, and then can give you examples when you do have the down days.
There was one example that made me think of this, and Ben, I almost get a little teary eyed thinking about this. The guy believed in me that I could do this, and that was just like, I didn't even believe in myself. He believed in me and made it happen. But there was one specific scenario we were talking about. I told him, like, I don't know what to do. You know, the work-life balance. I have this, client I have to go meet, and it was in Oklahoma. It was 200 miles away, but then I got to make it back. Like, how am I going to do this? And he's like, Jared, he's like, you can do this. He goes, make a story out of this. And he said, this can be the time you can look 10 years down the road and be like, hey, I left at 3 a.m. I went out and made this appointment. I busted it back, and I made it to my kid's banquet that night by 6 p.m. And I'm like, he's right. Like, don't look at it as a challenge, but look at it as a kind of like a story that you can put. And like, I tell this story to people because I did, like, actually on the way out, I got pulled over and the guy let me go, by the way. And we made the visit. It was awesome. Had lunch. We busted it back. I made it right in time for the kids event. And I look back, I was like, that was really cool. Like, I was going to doubt myself that I could even do that. Like, that it was going to work.
Exactly.
Right. But he made me, he said he believed that I could do it.
And 100%, right? And again, I don't want to go like really in depth into some of this stuff, but it's like we all have really two minds, right? We have our objective mind where we are thinking through things logically, and then we have our emotional mind, right? The thing that is fight or flight, the thing that tries to keep us safe, right? Most of the time, we think we're in control of both. We aren't. Most of the time, it's our emotions making decisions.
Driving the bus.
Brain rationalizes what happens after, right? So, and again, what I think the coach, and it made me think of that when you were just explaining that situation, is to help not to put aside the emotion, not to make it seem like it's not there. You acknowledge it, but to also point out in that scenario, like, there's an objective way for you to accomplish this. And it's like, how hell of an accomplishment would this be, right? Imagine what this would be like to tell this story later.
Yeah.
And then it just becomes real. And then all of the fear and all of the worry on whether or not you make it to the banquet, whether or not the meeting goes well, whether you're tired, all of the reasons that you thought shouldn't be done start to seem a lot less, right? They seem a little smaller and they don't hold as much weight, right? We all kind of talk ourselves and work ourselves up emotionally on difficult things. And it's nice to have somebody kind of let the air out of that occasionally and go, okay, is this really not doable, or is this really just a way to kind of make yourself more comfortable in some scenarios?
Yeah, that's awesome. So I want to kind of end on this note, talk about, if you are accepting clients, kind of that journey, that process, how that starts. If there's someone listening to this today and they're like, okay, Jared, you've talked about this twice now about having a coach. I'm going to reach out and contact somebody, or I'm going to figure this out. Just walk through the process, what that looks like. And, and a couple of things want you to incorporate this. Cause like, there's some things I was like, oh my gosh, do I want to open up? And, how much can I tell this person? And some of this stuff is going to be family related and issues I got here, legal issues I got, whatever it is. But like, talk about the trust with that and kind of the journey.
Yeah. And that's huge. I think before I work with anybody, like, I'm absolutely having this conversation with. And I'd say the first thing and the questions that what I'm trying to assess is, lots of people will say they want to achieve something. Most of those people don't actually want to achieve what they think they do. A lot of that is, in a lot of cases, they want more money because they think that's what they're supposed to want. And then when you start to talk to them and you start asking, hey, if this is really what you want to achieve, you want to quadruple your income in 3 years, right? Then I usually ask is like, hey, what are you willing to do to hit that goal, right? Are you willing to put in more effort to get to where you want to go, right? Because again, in the first couple of conversations, I want to understand if this person is willing or really wants what they say they want. And I'll push back on that, because I can't tell you, I've worked with a number of people at this point in my life where a year later, they were in the same place. And what I learned working with them was, I'm like, I would have wished they wouldn't have spent a year with me. That's a lot of energy on my time and a lot of money and energy on their time. They didn't really want it anyway. So at the onset, I usually push back on that to see if this is something somebody really wants, because usually it's a specific goal. But from a general standpoint, you're right. Like, you've got to establish trust. So at the onset, usually what we're talking about are more of the business aspects, where somebody's come from. I want to understand what they've done, not just where they are now, so that I can help them understand where they want to go and what that takes to get there, right? But I think the trust in those things come through time, right? And they usually come through, ironically, the same way they do in our industry, right? When something really bad goes wrong and you think you're going to lose a customer, and then inevitably, when you work your way through it, they then trust you more because you stand up and you did what you said you were supposed to do. You end up with a stronger relationship.
Ooh,
same things happen in coaching, right?
That's good.
The more you're able to share and the more you're able to be vulnerable, and it's not necessarily easy, and you're not expected to do that at first. But when you can get to that point with a coach, there's tremendous value to be able to help share those things, because that's usually where we need the most help. And then, the objective stuff that we've talked about, what it really looks like also is understanding what this goal looks like, visualizing it, either having a vision board or having an image for really trying to picture what you want your life to look like. And we do different exercises to help pull that out, to help crystallize that. And then you work backwards all the way back to where you are. And then we've got to determine what activity or what actions need to be taken consistently over enough time to get to where we want to go. Maybe it's a habit, maybe it's a new business unit. I mean, it all just depends on what that person's goal is. But through that process, you end up with very strong relationships. Like, I've got clients that I've had for many years now where, they're some of this. If I lost them, I would feel like I genuinely lost a family member. And that's the kind of relationship you get to, or I'm sure you have with your coach.
Oh, yeah.
Because
definitely
you trust them implicitly and you have to share the things you need help with. Those are the scariest things to share, right? So again, I think it does take a little give and take from, not necessarily the coach, but the person working with the coach.
And it's
as
more
far as kind of how it,
and it's more freight centered, right?
Yeah. And again, a lot of the clients that we work with, more freight centered, more on how are we going to grow our business? How do we hire? How do we negotiate better rates? How do we do a lot of the ins and outs, literally what we'll do is we'll dig into those things, go through them, use the different tools, show them different ways to do things. And I think what we've really been able to do for the coaching program is, with our content and the platform that we have, I think we have roughly 15 or 20,000 listeners on a weekly basis. We funnel all of this into a place where, we were talking about this earlier, we get to hear all the problems. We also get to hear the way they're solving some of them. So we're able to take best practices from certain things that we've learned, that we've done. And we are also seeing the common places where people are bumping their head and stubbing their toes to help point them out to the people that hopefully don't have to make that mistake in the first place to learn from it, right? It's really just having this person next to you that has helped pointing out the obvious things, help improving these things, and then digging into the things that, help you grow as a human being sometimes. It really is kind of, as cheesy as that sounds, we all kind of need that to some degree, because there is no line between work and personal life, right? Something happens in your personal life, it is affecting you here.
Absolutely.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
And the more people work from home, the more prevalent that's becoming. That's not getting...
Yeah. People talk a buzzword over the past, year, I think through COVID, all, but work-life balance. And I don't want to make fun of that, but
I do too.
There's no such thing as a work-life balance. There's work and life, and it's all together. Yes. And there's sometimes there's more work, and sometimes there's more life, but it's all one.
Just do the math. Even if you just do the math, it's kind of asinine, right? You sleep 8 hours, you go to work 8 hours, there's 24 hours in a day. It's not like you have another 8 hours of free time. There's no such thing as balance.
Yeah.
I've heard it better described as it really should be harmony, where sometimes a section is louder than the other. Sometimes one needs to be quiet. Sometimes it's, harmony. Time for this. And as long as there's harmony, there's not conflict, because you're right. You're never going to get balance in any of those things.
Yeah. To get back to the freight coaching, and we're going to end on this one. We'll put this link in our show notes. So if you're listening right now, you can drop down. We're also going to put your podcast. I forgot, actually, let's mention that real quick, but we'll put that into the show notes too. So you can jump over to the podcast that Ben and his other co-hosts talk just a little bit about that. But then also on the freight coaching, talk about what are the next steps if somebody listening wants to reach out to you and look at you as providing that service.
Yeah. Absolutely. If you're interested in coaching, you can just send me an email directly at benjamin@freight360.net.
Okay.
You can also send any questions that you have about anything in the industry to us as well at info @freight360.net. You can also reach all of us through our website at freight360.net. There's a contact card and a way that you can contact us through there. We do a weekly podcast. It's available wherever podcasts are. It drops at midnight Thursday going into Friday. So it is available as of 12:01 Friday every week. My colleague and I, Nate Cross, do that. We cover lots of the topics that are just up in the air for freight brokerages and trucking companies. I mean, we just recorded episode 190 today, so we've got quite a catalog over there.
That's awesome.
The other cool thing too is, if you want to learn more about anything, if you go to our website, there is a search bar. And if you put in any question that you have or any topic, it'll pull up all of our content along there. So if you just want to learn more about prospecting, throw in prospecting into the search bar. Every video, every blog, and every podcast we've ever done will come up under there.
I see that. And yeah, you have an easy subscribe too to your website and all the content related. So
yeah, and I forgot about that. Yeah, and we also do a weekly newsletter that goes out once a week that has, our podcast that we did that week, our blog that week. We do a weekly training video. We'll do one or two, usually at least one, on some topic on YouTube that covers something in the industry. I think the one we did, or the one that's releasing this week, is on different sources to understand the freight market, different sections of the industry.
Nice.
So like the different websites you can go to, government websites, to see what's going on in different niches within the market.
I love it. So cool, Ben. Well, man, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, man. And really appreciate your insight. Man, I think we're definitely going to be hearing more about you. We'll probably bring you back on the show. So, man, appreciate you.
Same. Hey, really enjoyed it. Looking forward to having you on an episode up and coming soon. It was a pleasure.
Tyler, I'll start off with your feedback on this one.
Yeah, Ben did really great, and he had a lot of golden nuggets in there. But one of them was whenever he was saying that he credits his success to just really understanding both sides, no matter what position he was at and no matter what company. And he goes in to talk about how, as a carrier, the best thing you can do for your success is to understand how a broker and a shipper operates. Like, really, understand their perspective, understand their side, and vice versa. If you're a broker, really try to understand the carrier's perspective, and that'll really help you progress your company.
Yeah. One thing I'll point out, I think Ben just saw opportunities that other people didn't see, in every role that he had. And I think that's where we got to look as business owners, like, where do we see opportunities? Yeah, there's always going to be, the market's always changing, and there's going to be highs and lows, but how do we position ourselves, depending on where we are in that cycle, to be that? One thing, we're kind of doing this activity at BulkLoads, but I want to challenge our audience. Like, I've said this before, man, but we really try to do goals and set goals in here. As a business owner, and I'm asking you all the question, man, you can comment in the comments below if you're watching from YouTube. But, like, do you have a number at the end of the year that you're trying to get to? Like, we all want to. What it really boils down to is profit. But, like, what is your number at the end of the year that you want to make? Are you wanting to make $100,000, $200,000, $500,000, or whatever, or in gross revenue, man? Are you wanting to be at 5 million at the end of the year, 10 million, or whatever? My challenge is to you, write that number down. Like, right now, write it down, man. If you're driving down the road, be careful, but, like, put a number down that you want to hit and try to set high expectations. Yeah. The thing is, if we don't have a number, we don't know where we're going. Right. And I think we look at in here in all of our companies, but we have to know, hey, what is the goal? And more importantly, all your staff, drivers, employees, they have to know the number. If they don't know the number, then we don't know where we're going. And I think it's that simple. Sometimes when you do that, it almost provides a little anxiety, but that's what it's supposed to do. Right. Like, when you have a clear number, like, every day you're going to be thinking about that. And I say, put that number, man, if you're driving down the road, put that number on your dash. You see, stick it on there to say, hey, by the end of 2023, I want to be here. And again, you may not hit that number, but I bet you're going to come a lot closer to that number than if you don't have that number on there. So there's just something crazy. And I've done this with goal setting, like things I want to do. And I still have, when I was in graduate school working on my MBA, we had a professor say, write down your 10 goals, and I guarantee 8 of those are going to happen. And I still have, actually, I took a picture of that. I think I have it saved in my lockbox, but on my phone, I look at those goals, and by God, man, I think I've hit all 10 now.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But you have to have those down, and again, where you can see those visible. So my challenge to you out there today, whether you're a freight brokerage, whether you're a owner-operator, fleet owner, write down a number. Maybe you already have that number down. If you do, man, make it more visible where you see that, man, where if you have an office, where you hang it on the fridge, or you see it, wherever you interact. Yeah. And again, it's going to almost create a little tension or anxiety because you know that there's a number there. And I promise you, you will get closer to that number or actually hit that number. We did this last year with some goals, especially specifically Smart Freight, and we hit the numbers. Actually, we exceeded the numbers. And it was just like, would we have done that otherwise? Maybe, but I think probably not, because we knew that it was there.
Yeah. And there's something to say too about whenever you see it, it may cause a little anxiety or whatever. But I mean, that goes to show that, growth only happens whenever you're uncomfortable. And to the fact that if you're seeing it every day, and even Ben spoke on this in the podcast, but there's powerful, truth to repetition if you can repeat it every single day,
especially
small
do
tasks.
It. Yeah, it doesn't matter what business. So yeah, I said in the beginning, Ben is a coach. He coaches clients. I haven't actually listened to any of his coaching advice, but man, I would just advise you out there. Coaching has gotten bigger and bigger in the industry. You see more coaches in specific industries, but I would encourage you to go out there and find a coach. Maybe you're sitting there and it's like, that could be, I don't want to spend that money. I guarantee you are going to get a 10x plus return on your investment, because like you all and like me, sometimes we get stuck in the business all the time, and we have to get ourselves out to be working on the business. If we are wanting to grow, that's where we need to be. If you're happy where you are, that's fine. I'm not wired that way. I don't think you're wired that way. Most people aren't. We want to keep growing, because if you're not growing, you're moving backwards in life and business on that. So, Tyler, you're going to put Ben's information, their podcast as well, and their website. Actually, you just put their website up, and their podcast is on there, so you can reach out to them. But I just want to say thank you, Ben, for coming on the show. Man, when I talk to people like him, it makes me excited. We know, again, what I said in the beginning, that the industry is challenging right now. But I think the landscape is positive down the road. If we can dig in right now, find solutions, figure out how we grow, man, good things are going to come. So cool. Awesome. Well, hey, as always, thank you for listening to the BulkLoads podcast, wherever you're listening to it. And would love for you to share this through your social medias or text to friends that could find this one very valuable. So thank you very much. And as always, God bless.